Hey guys, how are we doing? Back on another video from Super Eye Patch Wolf. This has been recommended by quite a few people, and it's an anime that I'm quite intrigued with because I have never seen it, wanting to know what Super Eye Patch Wolf has to say about it. And it is from the same person who did Hunter x Hunter, and Hunter x Hunter is up there for me, one of my personal faves. So yeah, everyone that I do reactions to seems to like have an opinion on Yu Yu Hakusho and use examples of it and stuff, and let's see why you should watch Yu Yu Hakusho.
Writing about your favorite series is hard. It can be difficult to put into words how much the series you love the most really means to you. And even more so if it's one that you experienced at a young age.
Oh, yeah.
As much of your memories and emotions from that time become inseparable from your actual feelings of the show, making it difficult to really break down its individual elements or view the series with any kind of perspective. And this is something I've been struggling with a lot lately, as I felt it's about time to cover quite possibly my favorite anime.
Yeah.
But this has left me with a quandary of sorts. How do I talk about this series in a way that both communicates how I feel about it, while also giving an assessment that could be considered fair? And after meditating on it for many weeks, the answer I've come to is that I can't. Some series are just too close to home, too embedded in our own personal narrative, and coming at them in a way that could be considered in any way objective or impartial
is impossible.
Yeah. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the thing worth exploring here isn't some arbitrary value assignment based on perceived objectivity. Perhaps the far more worthwhile discussion is, what is it about this series that elicited such a strong reaction in the first place? Yu Yu Hakusho Volume 5 was the first manga I ever owned. I first came across the series in the early 2000s, from the days where I would mass download Japanese SNES ROMs, one of which happened to be Yu Yu Hakusho Tokubetsu Hen, a bizarre turn-based fighting game with game mechanics that are nigh on impossible to explain. But despite this, and the fact that it was entirely in Japanese, something about the world the game presented really resonated with me. I liked the dark, moody vibe, the intense and often bizarre special attacks, and most of all, the strange, off-kilter yet infinitely stylish characters. And I became kind of fascinated with it, deeply curious to find out more. The title being in Japanese, however, meant that I was left without a lead to go on.
That's so funny.
Until one day, in my local Forbidden Planet, there lay a single copy of Yu Yu Hakusho Volume 5.
And you recognise the characters,
that's cool. I read it in its entirety on the bus home, before doing so again that night, and would continue to do so many times over. And even with no prior knowledge of the rest of the series, I totally fell in love with its world and its characters. There was just a distinct energy to this manga. One thing to note, however, is that Yu Yu Hakusho, at least for me, is not unique in this regard. I have similar stories about practically every other popular anime and manga from this period.
You just come across
the key difference, however, is that over time, most of my interest in these other series would eventually wane and fall off. But this never really happened with Yu Yu Hakusho. I'd rewatch parts of it at least once a year, and it's always been a series I've been excited to show people. And it seems I'm not the only one. To date, the series has sold 50 million volumes. Which might not seem like a lot compared to the giants of the industry.
That's still a lot.
At least not until you take into account that Yu Yu Hakusho is only 19 volumes long, meaning that it has one of the highest sales per volumes rate of any manga. And so, the discussion becomes, what is it about this series that grabbed me in the first place? And second, why is it that myself and so many others still hold it in such high regard 25 years after its conclusion? Well, friends, it's with great pleasure I can say that it's time to discuss just that. This one has been coming for a very long time. So, let's talk about why you should watch Yu Yu Hakusho.
Cool.
Yu Yu Hakusho began publication on December 3rd, 1990, and over the course of its 4-year run, it would chronicle the teenage years of Yusuke Urameshi, a high school delinquent who, after being hit by a car and becoming the subject of an underworld clerical error, would be assigned the role of spirit detective, and this would be the doorway that would lead to him becoming entangled in a world of spirits, demons, and psychopaths. One of Yu Yu Hakusho's strongest aspects is how the storytelling evolves as the series progresses. Things start off relatively light and episodic, with Yusuke tasked with dealing with a number of minor spirit world-related cases. And this is the only part of the show that really lives up to its translated title of Ghost Files. As from episode 20 on, the structure and tone of the show dramatically shift, with not only the physical danger our heroes face intensifying, but so too with the sophistication of the storytelling. The series starts with Yusuke trying to stop bad people from doing bad things, but from the Dark Tournament on, each of the later villains would present a major ideological difference to that of Yusuke's, whether it's the nature of strength and how to achieve it, the true essence of people, and if that genuinely is something worth protecting, or if human life really has any more value than that of other races. Despite this though, the series never loses the sense of fun and enjoyment from its earlier, lighter episodes, and a huge part of this comes down to its cast of extremely likeable, relatable characters.
They do look cool.
In a way, it's quite difficult to communicate the very particular charm of the cast of Yu Yu Hakusho. On the surface, they seem like a fairly typical shonen crew, with many of their influences being plainly obvious. But digging a little deeper, you can see there's a subtle nuance at work here, and the outcome is that you're left with a cast of incredibly distinct, fully formed feeling personalities. I think what so thoroughly separates this aspect of the show from other shonen series is that while the cast of Yu Yu Hakusho go through very similar story arcs as other anime, with big bads, power levels, and tournament arcs, there's always a distinct focus on who these characters are and how they feel.
I like that. Actual character development on everybody. I like that.
Fights, but what this belies is his neglectful upbringing in a broken home, which in turn has left him unable to really deal with his emotions, which both explains his aggressive temperament, but is also worked back into the shonen-style narrative later on, with the separation between Yusuke and his feelings serving as a barrier between him and his true inner strength, meaning that Yusuke's power progression is directly tied to his emotional development, which is something I've seen attempted by a lot of different series, but this is one of the few that actually really pulls it off. And it's in this we can see one of the true strengths of the series as a whole. Despite the fact that these characters are couched in a very typical shonen-style narrative and world, the characters themselves never stop feeling like real people with very particular thoughts, motivations, and outlooks. I remember watching this one scene much later on in the series where Yusuke is nearly killed by an enemy psychic, and upon being saved, he drops to his knees and begins punching the ground in frustration, furious at the fact that after everything he's been through up until this point, all the battles he's fought and all the villains he's survived, somehow new, more dangerous enemies keep emerging. I'm always struck by what an oddly human moment this is in this kind of story. The nature of shonen narrative necessitates that as one bad guy is defeated,
another stronger will come across.
One must rise up to
but a normal person would get angry about it. I've
never seen a protagonist show outward frustration at this fact. But when you think about it, this is the exact kind of human reaction that would be invoked by such a continuous stream of escalating problems.
I like that. That's cool.
Another aspect that helps sell these characters is that they're often just given the room to actually be characters. There's several episodes where the plot isn't really moved forward, but instead we're just left to spend some time with the cast and watch the different interactions play out between them. And invariably, these are some of my favourite moments of the entire show, whether it's the simple cuts to Yusuke hanging out at an arcade, or the menacing interaction that takes place between Kurama and Karasu, establishing between the two a simmering hatred, but also a kind of twisted attraction. While I think it's easy to establish who a character is in the very big moments of a story's plot, it's more difficult and in several ways more valuable to be able to do so in the very small ones, and this is another area I really think the show excels. Take this moment from the Chapter Black saga, as Kuwabara, Botan, Kurama, and Hiei all must go through separate doors in a giant puzzle house, and this happens.
I'm ready when the rest of you guys are.
I'm all set here.
Let's begin.
The thing that gets me about this scene is rather than join in with the enthusiasm of his allies, Hiei remains silent.
Wow.
I love this touch. In a less well-written story, he probably would have just spouted some standard tough guy line. But the fact that he doesn't say anything says so much about his contempt of the current situation, as well as his disdain for the enthusiasm of his allies, perfectly capturing what an adorably cynical little shit Hiei actually is.
Okay.
It may seem a little excessive calling out such a minor moment, but my point here is that it is so minor. Small little character moments like this are present throughout each scene of Yu Yu Hakusho, giving us constant little insights into the world of these characters and how they think. And this same consistent writing can be seen even through the relationships the characters form with one another. As the series goes on, various members of the cast develop a kind of cadence with each other, and often you can see different parts of their personality being brought out depending on who they are interacting with. Like, take the chiding, mocking tone Hiei will use in his many, often hilarious bickering exchanges with Kuwabara, and compare them to the far softer, if still distinctly aggressive manner he'll use with his sister Yukina. There's even several examples where very minor supporting characters form oddly touching relationships with one another, and what we see in these characters during these moments does an incredible amount to flesh out the lesser cast members of Yu Yu Hakusho, even if it does nothing to advance the overall plot. And so, what all this results in is that whether the characters are fighting for their lives or just hanging out in a hotel room, it's always equally engaging.
Cool.
And even though Yu Yu Hakusho is at its heart very much a battle manga, I never found myself waiting for the combat to start like I do with so many other series. Instead, it's just fun to spend time with these guys.
So you're not going,
when's the fight?
It's like, I'm enjoying this.
To the point that I'm comfortable saying that this is probably my favourite cast of any anime. I actually used to carry a photo of these guys in my wallet as a teenager, which speaks not only to my extreme social ineptness, but also to what an amazing job Togashi has done in making them feel like real, genuine people.
That's class.
This deeply character-centric approach also carries through to many of the brutal and exciting fight scenes of Yu Yu Hakusho, as not only are we more invested with these characters and therefore more engaged to see them pull through and survive the battles, but also there's a distinct texture to each different character's fighting style, with the careful tactical plans of Kurama differing from the full-on direct assaults of Kuwabara. There's a great variety to the kind of fights that can take place in Yu Yu Hakusho, and a lot of this is down to the many weird and imaginative powers the characters have, like Sniper's ability to lock onto his targets, turning everyday objects into deadly homing missiles, or Elder Togoro's grotesque ability to reshuffle his inner organs at will, meaning landing a death blow on him is practically impossible.
Oh god,
I think
right,
the thing
so you can
I
just
appreciate
move everything
most
around.
about the fights from Yu Yu Hakusho, though, is that they always feel worked into the overall narrative in a way that always feels meaningful. Take the Dark Tournament, for example, the most battle-centric arc of the show. Not only are our heroes forced into the bloody contest against their will, but from the audience's perspective, they are the bad guys, with a stadium of demons baying for their blood. They also must constantly deal with the corrupt tournament committee conspiring against them, putting our heroes at a constant disadvantage, making each victory feel all the more hard-fought and each loss seem crushingly unfair. And at the end of it all lies the climactic
there's some cool
battle
character
of Team
designs
Toguro,
there.
with several key plot events feverishly building the personal stakes of this fight, meaning that when Yusuke finally does step out to face Toguro, the show has established a deeply personal animosity
that's one
between
beefy
the two,
dude.
giving their battle a palpable emotional weight. Another huge aspect that makes these fights stand out is their unique visual treatments. Many of the fights are animated with a frenetic energy, limbs elongate, proportions warp, and faces distort in order to brutally convey just how hard these characters are hitting each other, and how much kinetic force is behind each and every attack. with the animation, direction, and even shot composition being pushed to what feels like their absolute limit. And the result is that something as simple as a street fight becomes a dynamic visual feast, exploding with the stylistic flair of a much larger encounter.
It does look class.
Which also brings us handily to the visuals of Yu Yu Hakusho.
Mm-hmm.
But before we dive in, I think it's first worth taking a step back and examining the series' source material, the 1990 manga. In our Genius of Dragon Ball video, we talked a lot about Toriyama's specific approach to laying out manga and the path of action he creates within his pages.
Okay.
And it's interesting because Togashi is kind of the opposite of this. His pages don't really flow in the same way Toriyama's do, but instead,
I like how she's overlaid
far
all the
more
panels.
focused
That's cool.
on the distinct emotion of each panel, with a lot of emphasis placed on the character's facial expression and using different techniques to best convey the appropriate tone.
Whoa.
To the point that the style of drawing can dramatically shift from page to page, with the characters being portrayed as goofy, stylized cartoons in some, and somber, semi-realistic portraits in others. And this is my favorite thing about Togashi as a draftsperson, the incredible variety of visual language in his work, sometimes being fun, playful, and cute, and sometimes being grotesque, imposing, and frightening. Unfortunately, due to a combination of physical and mental health issues, the quality of Togashi's art would dramatically decrease as the series went on. But this is also why I consider the anime so important. While I think the earlier episodes of the show suffer from some stiff character animation and weak posing and key art, the quality of the series would dramatically increase as the show progressed, with the flat designs of earlier episodes giving way to far more fully formed, detailed character work. The visual variety we talked about from the manga seems to be something that Studio Period worked extremely hard to recreate. Rather than tie the show down to one specific style, there's a huge variety to how the characters are expressed on screen. It really feels like a production where the individual strengths of each animator were encouraged and let run wild. And the result is some stunningly unique animated set pieces that seem specifically tailored to match the emotion and tone of the show's more dramatic moments. One of my favorite instances of this being Hiei's Dragon of the Darkness Flame, storyboarded by Akiyuki Shinbo and animated by Masayuki Yoshihara. And just look at how much the drawings here deviate from the standard style of the show, and how it really sells the insane, uncontrollable force Hiei is wielding.
Boom.
You can even see a lot of the same expressiveness behind a lot of the very minor and even mundane actions of the characters. Like, check out this animation of Koto climbing on her desk. A much simpler movement could have been conveyed in around 5 to 6 drawings.
Definitely.
But instead, just look at the love and detail that's gone into her animation here. How much fun it is to watch, and how perfectly it conveys Koto's playful, excitable nature. There's even several scenes where the anime goes completely above and beyond the manga, adding a huge amount to the source on a shot-to-shot basis. Take, for example, Hiei's fight against Bui in the Dark Tournament. On the right, we have the animated encounter, and on the left, we have the corresponding manga panels. And look at just how much the manga has added in, really elevating Bui's desperation, while also greatly pushing Hiei's detached, cold confidence.
There's loads that's not in the manga.
I'm actually editing down a lot of the animated sequence here for brevity's sake, but even so, the amount of extra work that's on display here is kind of staggering, and it's instances like this that make the anime adaptation so valuable. Another great example of this is the Doctor versus Yusuke fight, which takes the simple visual treatment of the manga and turns it up to 11 by bathing the scene in deep black shadows and rendering both characters in horrific detail, and in doing so, dramatically raises the tense drama of the scene, which is appropriate as this is the first time Yusuke is faced with taking the life of a human. This scene also shows off another strong aspect of the show's production, its willingness to push the colour and lighting design of different scenes, with many sections of the show set in distinctly strange and odd colour palettes, further enhancing the individuality and tone of many of the show's scenes. All these factors combine in a way that makes Yu Yu Hakusho constantly visually surprising, and what it loses in consistency it gains many times over with a style that swims and surges to match and even elevate the show's story, as well as the distinct emotions of its characters. I think Yu Yu Hakusho, alongside Outlaw Star and Gunsmith Cats, is probably my favourite example of the 90s anime aesthetic. And this is in large part down to the show's gorgeous character designs, partially due to the distinct 90s proportions of the characters' facial features, with large dramatic eyes and thick, volumetric, highly stylized hair. But it's also because of the extremely period-centric clothing the characters wear, an aspect that was heavily played up upon in the official promotional material for the show. Not only do the different characters' various outfits really highlight the particular time period of the show's creation, but I think they also succeed in communicating that these are actual outfits that could be worn by actual teenagers, which really helps communicate that despite all the insane, dramatic and supernatural goings on, these are still very much kids going through their adolescence. The same sense of style also appears in a lot of the more fantastical demonic characters, being styled in a far more otherworldly fashion, but still retaining a lot of the look and feel of anime from that period, resulting in some beautifully distinct and memorable character designs. And you know, between you and me, I actually used to have kind of a crush on Jury, the ring announcer, which, looking back, was really silly.
Was it though?
God, she's beautiful. The distinct 90s vibe also contrasts beautifully with a lot of the more grotesque visual aspects of the show. Takashi has mentioned in interviews that he's a huge fan of H.R. Giger, a Swiss surrealist painter most notable for his work on the Alien movies.
Wow.
And you can see his influences in many of the more demonic characters and architecture of the show. In particular, the second stadium in the latter half of the Dark Tournament, a terrifying, imposing building which subtly foreshadows the somber, darker direction the show would take from this point on. I think this duality in the show's visuals, the fun 90s aesthetic and the creepy horror vibes, is a huge part in establishing its distinct atmosphere. And the two looks together create a great visual metaphor for the show as a whole. A series that's extremely fun but also gets incredibly dark and nihilistic. The same duality can be heard in the soundtrack of Yu Yu Hakusho. It's a terrific mix of late 80s nostalgic synth rock combined with really excellent low-key creepy tones. Interestingly, the same synth-esque style has been infused into a lot of the show's sound effects, creating some really strange but effective audio accompaniments. In particular, the way they layer synthesizers in with the sound whenever someone takes a big hit. It's unusual, but it also does a lot to sell the impact of these moments. Check it out. So this brings us to the voice acting. And I know there's mixed feelings about the sub and the dub and whatnot, but unless you are completely 100% opposed to dubs on a fundamental level, I have to heavily recommend the English dub on this one. There's just too many standout performances, like Chris Sabat, voice of Vegeta, and his amazingly spirited, energetic take on Kuwabara, Damien Clark's cold, detached, frightening performance as Toguro, and of course Chuck Huber's brilliantly cynical, mean-spirited embodiment of Hiei. It's a fantastic localization and a damn near flawless cast. Botan's accent is cute as hell, and I won't hear another word about it.
Don't get all big-eyed. Any attack has to travel through air to get to me, right? I control the air, so you might as well hand them over and say, do whatever you want with them, Jen.
Okay, nearly all the voice acting in Yu Yu Hakusho is great, and let's just leave it at that. Wait, was he meant to be Irish? Was that meant to be a fucking Irish accent? Finally, seeing as I've spent 23 minutes evangelically singing the praises of this show, I think it's only fair to point out some of the show's flaws, which it does have. I mentioned earlier on how the artwork of the earlier episodes isn't particularly strong, and unfortunately I'd have to say the same for a lot of the early story arcs, in particular those of the Spirit Detective saga. They're still extremely enjoyable in their own right, but looking back on the show as a whole, they don't really carry the same level of characterization or emotional weight as later on, with the show taking roughly 20 episodes to really start hitting its stride. There's also the odd fight with some unfortunate pacing issues, with a lot of time spent on reaction shots or the two fighters just standing and talking to each other. I think you could even look at the combat beats of these particular fights and condense them down into really solid encounters. It's only the space between these combat beats that frustrates, resulting in the occasional fight feeling maybe half an episode too long. But even then, most of the fights finish up quickly enough in around an episode and a half. The show also has an unfortunate tendency to commit to very dramatic plot events, only to double back on them later on, which retroactively robs some of the show's best moments of their dramatic punch. To say any more would be to go into major spoilers, but anyone who's seen the show will know what I'm talking about. Finally, it's difficult to talk about Yu Yu Hakusho and not mention the ending. Without getting into spoilers, there comes a point in the final arc where things just sort of cut, and the story concludes, with major plot events being explained to the viewer retroactively in what basically amounts to a dialogue recap. And it's incredibly unfortunate, as the build-up to the final showdowns of the previous two arcs were incredible. And while the final epilogue episode serves as a pretty sweet and enjoyable send-off to the series, it's hard not to feel like the third arc of the final saga is missing, leaving one of the best shonen stories in existence feeling tragically incomplete. What's interesting though is that days after the final chapter of Yu Yu Hakusho was published, Togashi released a short essay alongside an interview called On Finishing the Serialization of Yu Yu Hakusho. Looking back on failure. In it, he talks about the extreme pressure the creation of the series put on him, and how he felt he could never live up to other manga artists, which in turn drove him to work 7 days a week, getting on average 4 hours sleep a night, obsessively trying to craft the manga he wanted, causing him extreme mental and physical exhaustion, until finally he grew disillusioned and abruptly ended the series. I think the thing that comes across most strongly from this essay is the pain and frustration felt by Togashi in creating a weekly manga. But I also think that it's through this we can understand the final part of what makes Togashi's mangas so great, as we can see elements of this same pain and frustration in the characters of Yu Yu Hakusho. There's a moment towards the end of the Dark Tournament where Toguro tells Yusuke that to really succeed at anything, you must first throw everything else away. And after reading Togashi's essay, it's impossible not to see this as something that he really genuinely struggled with. Or take the moment earlier on where Yusuke has his breakdown. The frustration he feels here feels so real because it is. Yusuke's anger at the ever-continuing stream of insurmountable problems feels like the exact frustration Togashi wrote about in his essay. And once you realize this, you begin to see these small, deeply human sentiments everywhere in Yu Yu Hakusho. Whether it's Togoro's willingness to abandon everything else in the pursuit of success, or Sensui's extreme disillusionment with the world around him, or the simple camaraderie between friends who have survived so much together. These narratives parallel Togashi's own. And so what he's actually done here is taken the standard shonen framework and worked within it to tell a uniquely personal, relatable story. What brought me to this series was its unique look, its exciting battles, and its endearing characters. But what keeps me coming back is the deeply human components to the challenges these characters face. These stories of obsession, stories of disillusionment, and ultimately stories of how friendship and hope can overcome both those things. These will always be stories worth telling, which is why the series has never lost relevance, why it's still great, and
why you should watch
Yu Yu Hakusho. friends, that is going to do it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hoped you enjoyed the video. If you did and would like to help me create more videos like this, then why not head over and check out my Patreon, where for even a single dollar you can join the official Super Eye Patch Wolf Pack and see your name among these amazingly strong people right here, who I am insanely appreciative of and are the sole reason I'm able to keep this channel going. I'm going to take a few days off and let the creative juices recharge a little, but I will of course be back soon with another video. But in the meantime, why not come hang out on the Let's Fight a Boss video game podcast, or follow me on Twitter at iPatchWolf. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.
Cool. It does seem worth watching. I just never really heard of it until I started watching videos on YouTube, like, and my Funko Pop collection recommendations from Amazon are Yu Yu Hakusho things, and I'm just like, oh. But yeah, that seemed cool. I do like the look of it, and I probably, if I can find, I don't know if it's on Crunchyroll. Like, again, this is where my problem lies. If it's not on Crunchyroll, I struggle, but I will probably try and check it out. Thank you guys very much for watching. What did you guys think of that? What did you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already, leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos, and I'll see you guys, all of you guys, next time.